Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Wednesday afternoon here on Kobold Press. I'm your littlest red dot here as your resident Kobold Twitch producer, and I am joined by a incredible table today for an interview all about Kobold Press's Worldbuilding Volume 2 guide. This is going to be a very awesome interview. I can't wait. We're already talking backstage. People are asking incredible questions. I already made secondary notes about questions, but before we dive in, I want to introduce these people. So let's go round robin, and let's let each of you kind of tell everybody at home who you are, just in case they don't know. And then we'll dive in deep. And for everybody at home, yes, we're going to take questions before you start asking. So simmer on them, and I'll let you know when we want to start gathering those out of chat. And because I'm a chaos monster, we're going to go counterclockwise, which means actually, James, we're starting with you.
Oh, okay. Hey, everybody. I'm James Sutter. I'm probably best known for working on the Pathfinder and Starfinder role-playing games. I was one of the creators of Pathfinder and the creative director on Starfinder, but I've also done comics, video games, a bunch of different stuff. And I'm now moving into young adult romance novels as well. So.
Oh, I'm gonna have questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit of a left turn there.
Yes, awesome. Banana, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am Banana. I am the co-founder and co-owner of Game and Curry, which is a small publishing company. We do publishing for board games and RPGs. And I also write a bunch of stuff. My latest work has been on Jiangshi Lun the Banquet Hall, which I co-designed with Senfeng Lim. And I also did a bit of haunt writing for Betrayal 3rd edition.
Ooh, nice. Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Baker. I am best known generally for creating the Eberron campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons and the card game Gloom. But I have been writing freelance TTRPGs for around 20 years now. And aside from that, I have designed MMORPGs, worked in the computer game industry, written some novels in Eberron, and currently I am working with my own company, Together Studios, which is both doing Eberron material for the DMs Guild and games like Illimat and Phoenix Dawn Command.
Oh, nice. Veronica, bring us home.
I'm Veronica Roth, and I am a novelist with no tabletop role-playing game experience.
Yes.
That's right. I am probably best known for my first novel, which is Divergent, but most recently I've been writing for an adult audience, which always sounds like it means something naughtier than I intend for it to, but adult sci-fi fantasy. So Chosen Ones was my most recent book.
Nice. Now, each of these writers, regardless of tabletop or not, all have contributed to this incredible new piece here from Kobold Press. And I have a hard copy this week, everybody. The Kobold Press Guide to Worldbuilding Volume 2. And this, I've had a chance to creak it open. I'm one of those people that have to read it cover to cover, so I'm going to be honest, I haven't covered all your essays yet. But that's okay. That's why you're here. You're going to tell us all about them today, at least to get us hyped to go pick up the book. So I think the best way to start, and the way I always like to start, is to ask that dreaded question of, how did you get started writing? Where did it begin? What was the little origin story for your writing career? And in no particular order, if anybody wants to start, please feel free.
I will just say that for me, I was given the original Dungeons & Dragons set when I was probably around 7 or 8, and just I really enjoyed the experience of creating stories with my friends. And as I got to be a teenager, I just basically said, these books exist, someone writes them, I'm going to have that job. And I had no idea how you got it, but I'm just like, this is a job that exists. Someone does this. So that's what I'm aiming for. And I was pretty much a straight path through that. And certainly as I was going through college, it wasn't clear how you got that job at the time. There weren't game design majors, but just kept at it. And I think, to me, just throughout my career in general, what I've always really loved is collaborative storytelling. And so I've done, LARPs, I've done tabletop role-playing games like Gloom, are sort of storytelling card games. And I have ended up, writing novels within Eberron and such. But for me, what I really love is all the different forms of collaborative storytelling, because we get to create something really unique.
Absolutely. Other thoughts?
I could go.
Yeah.
I got started just because I was a super imaginative and very isolated child. I used to play pretend a lot. Like, you know what, that kid who plays pretend too long? That was me. So I think at one point I was like, okay, this is embarrassing. This has to stop. And I started writing, the stories down instead. So I've been writing almost daily since I was 11.
Wow.
And then one day it was like, well, I'll just give this, like I finally finished a manuscript and decided to see what I could do with it. That was not my first book. It was the book that I do not speak of.
Okay, now I want to see it.
No, it was widely rejected. I mean, everyone rejected it. So I just put it away and wrote something else, and that was Divergent, which was bananas. But anyway, so it was a little bit of like the dream job, like Keith is talking about, but I just never articulated it that way. I was like, I'm just gonna see if they let me do it.
Right.
And they did.
Nice.
I just have to say I have a short story back when I was in college that I sent around to a lot of magazines, and it was never actually rejected, but every magazine I sent it to either went out of business immediately thereafter or suddenly stopped taking unsolicited submissions. So I have my own secret albatross that lurks in a drawer somewhere.
Banana, you want to go?
I could go next. Yeah, sure. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life for a very long period of time. I was raised by television. I always loved TV. I always loved like movies, telling stories through, that sort of medium. Just like I went to college for, video art. I minored in cinema studies. I really loved film and television. And reading, but I never really thought about like writing as a thing. I was always really into like storytelling, but how? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Are we getting audio feedback? I'm sorry.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I was like, I'll just put it in the chat.
Just a little. It might be your gain. You might want to take your gain down, Tad.
Oh, okay. It also might be that we have like lawnmowers outside.
It's good now.
Doing
that sounds
things.
great.
Okay, cool.
It might have been the lawnmowers. Yeah, look at that.
It's just lawnmowers. But yeah, so I just like didn't know really what I wanted to do until I discovered LARPing. And also like playing Avery Alder's Monster Hearts, that sort of like opened up things for me. And I was just like, oh, you could do this. You could do this for a living. You could, write stories and tell stories around the table with other people. And that sort of opened doors for me.
Cool.
I have this image with you being raised by televisions of just thinking about a pack of wild televisions in the wild, with like a nest or something.
Oh, see, and I went straight to WandaVision. I'm thinking like Banana Vision.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, James? How'd you get here?
Well, so, I also grew up, wanting to be a novelist, loving playing role-playing games and stuff like that. But I didn't really know that was an option. And so I thought I was going to be in journalism. And I did journalism all through college and loved it because journalism in college is all sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was like, go have adventures and write about it. And then I got out of college and started working in like small, suburban newspapers and realized that was not nearly as fun. I really liked writing, but I really didn't like reporting. And so I was looking around for a place where I could write and worry less about facts. And I found that Dungeon and Dragon magazine were based nearby, and that they were actually looking for an editor-in-chief for Amazing Stories magazine.
Oh, okay.
And I was 20 and right out of college. And so I sent an email to the CEO saying, I am totally unqualified, but I would love to work there. And so Lisa Stevens, who owns Paizo Publishing, liked me enough to say like, well, we'll see what we can find. So my first job in the RPG industry was finding images for their web store at a nickel a JPEG.
Wow.
And that was my foot in the door. But then, I moved up to working on Dungeon Magazine, and then we created Pathfinder. And then eventually I was running the novel line for that with Paizo and Tor. And then also doing, I was the creative director on Starfinder, and just spent a decade working on all these different games But at the same time, like novels have always been my first love. And so eventually I stepped back from that job to just write full time. And so I still do video games and RPG stuff and comics, but now my big thing is that I'm doing young adult romance novels. And so I just sold my first one and it'll come out next year.
That's so
Congratulations.
Cool. That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm very excited.
So I'm hearing that, like, regardless of kind of how you started, there are two similarities I heard across the board. One is that the diversity of what you write is maybe key and important to, like, long-term survival of something like that, but also this idea that you didn't know it was a thing. Like, you didn't know it could be a thing to do the thing. So over time, I imagine that you have had some key bits of insight. What might those be to pass along for other people who also just don't know it could be a thing?
Oh.
It can be a thing.
It can be, yeah. Put it in neon sign, right?
I'll just say, you know, what I said before is part of the point to me is I had a book in my hand and I said, someone made this book. So part of the thing is anything you are encountering, if there's something you enjoy, it exists because someone made it happen. And if someone made it happen, you can make it happen. You know, it's not always a clear or easy path. But, you know, look into where did this come from? Who did it? How did they get there? You know, I mean, it's there's always a way.
And once you do, don't wait for a job posting. Like, you really, in all the creative industries, you kind of got to kick in the door, right? So like, you need to either make something, right? If you're trying to get into fiction, right, then you got to write that short story or write that novel and then send it out. But for game stuff, just contact the companies that you like and say, here's who I am, here's what I love about what you do, and I would love to work with you. And most of the time nothing will happen, but sometimes it'll work.
It's a little thing, but especially for tabletop role-playing game things, whenever they actually become a thing again, conventions are a big thing for that. Because certainly part of how I got started, you know, again, when there were no game design majors or things like that, was just talking to the people. Most of the time at conventions, the people who run companies and such are there, and most of the time they're happy to talk to people. You know, so it was, as James said, just sort of talking to people and saying, what are you looking for? What could I do? You know, so again, whether it's tabletop role-playing games or things, other fields, find people who are doing what you want to do, and they may be happy to talk about how they got there.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Keith a little bit, I think that at conventions, you could also find people to play test stuff with. So if you're play testing a game, usually the designer is going to be there. So that way you can meet the designer and see how they, you know, design the game, or, you know, if they're working with a publisher, you could get your foot in the door that way. And also, like, using social media as well is really good, because that way you get to meet like all sorts of different people. If you can't go to conventions, you can definitely follow people and see who they're following and sort of reach out to them that way.
Nice.
Yeah, sort of to bring it all together. I think it's good to be very curious about like how the world that you're trying to enter works. So a lot of times you hear like, don't give up. And I totally agree with that. However, it's like, don't give up, but also ask a lot of questions before you just throw yourself at other people. I think that someone gave me that advice, and that was good. Like, I just type a lot of questions into Google. How does this work? How do people do that? Like, are there any books about this? Like, I need to find them, you know? Going to conventions is like such a good idea, because you just meet so many different kinds of people. You probably, you know, maybe make a fool of yourself once or twice, but it's not a big deal. Everyone's like nice at conventions. They're there because they love this thing that you also love.
Yeah, you kind of have overcome one of the major like speed bumps, right? Road bumps on the way to getting, because people are excited to meet other people. I love that.
Yeah.
Veronica, do you want to talk at all about the agent process? Like, I feel like getting an agent is something that is not really a thing in tabletop, but is such a huge thing in fiction.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. That was like, agents basically serve as our gatekeepers, but like in a good way in publishing. So if you want to get published by a major publisher, usually you need someone to represent your work. That person is an agent, and they will help you like not just facilitate the sale of your work, but also navigate the process. So they're valuable throughout, not just like at the initial sale part of it. And they'll help you to like not get screwed over, which is really important. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to get screwed over. So you need someone to help. And also they can just get your foot in the door in a lot of places that the door is not so open. So for me, I mean, but the good thing about agents is that you can just send them things. Like you go on their website, they give you, they want a query letter, which is like an exciting sounding summary of your project, and then maybe some sample pages, and like your stuff is as good as some other guys. Like everybody's kind of even at that point. And so, and I'll tell you that just following the rules on their website puts you like a step above a lot of people. So if you're just
It's true.
diligent about reading, you're already like way ahead of the game, which is great. So that's how I found my agent. I just queried her. I met her at a conference actually too. So I really do believe in the power of the writers' conference.
And I think even, for TTRPGs, it's a similar thing of a lot of companies, or at least, I haven't checked very recently, but generally, if you go onto a lot of the websites and such associated with your TTRPGs, a lot of companies do what are called open calls, where they will basically say, we're doing an anthology of X, pitch us your thing. And that was certainly how I got started off, was Atlas Games is doing a collection of adventures for On the Edge, send one in. And again, those sort of things generally aren't going to pay very well. Oftentimes, it is the case where they're asking you to send in essentially an adventure or a monster, and if they don't take it, well, you've created that and do what you want with it. But it's still exactly that opportunity of, if nobody's heard of you, if you've never done anything, this book is looking for 100 monsters, and send a couple in and hope they like what you do. It's a great way to just sort of get noticed, as it were.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of board game publishers, they do this thing called publisher speed dating, especially at conventions, where they just like have a list of people. Right, exactly. Like sometimes they're online as well. So if you're meeting up in like Discord or something like that, they would just like meet a whole bunch of people. They would go through like all your different pitches, and they would select the ones that they are most interested in. I don't see that as much with TTRPGs, but I think there is a little bit more of that shift going on, where like more tabletop role-playing industry people, they're like more interested in what board games are doing now, so they're trying to get more into speed dating or speed publishing or whatever, that kind of thing.
Nice. Yeah. And I guess on that topic, wait, Keith and Banana, you mentioned you're self-publishing. You guys are doing more self-publishing, which seems to be a very different process than, say, working for another company, taking a freelance contract. Would you like to talk a little bit about maybe some of the best practices around like self-publishing and successes you've had doing that?
It's a lot of work.
I mean, it is, it is definitely a big change from when I started out in the industry. Like when I started making, my first card game, Gloom, there was the idea that I could have just done that myself was simply unimaginable. I needed to work with a company because I didn't have any, how would I raise the capital? What would I do with the infrastructure? Whereas today, between crowdfunding, between things like drive-through cards, it's a lot more possible, even with card games, but certainly with TTRPGs, there's a lot more outlets. The fact that you can do things, if you're willing to just do something as a PDF, if it doesn't need to be a physical book, there's so many more outlets. And of course, there's a lot less, lower bar. So recently, a year or two ago, I put out a book called Exploring Eberron on the DMs Guild. And the main point is that it's PDF and print on demand. But again, that means the investment on my end was the art, the editing. I was doing the writing myself. So, there was a significant initial cost, but it was still reasonable. It was still something I could do. And part of the, turning that around, what I'd say is the challenges you face there is there's a lot of people doing it.
Yeah. And
so the main thing is there are lots of ways that you can publish your own things. The challenge is to think about, okay, but how do you make it stand out? How are you going to get noticed? How are you? And there's lots of, answers to that. I'm just saying that is the turnaround. The slight advantage to working with a known company is they already have an audience, a system of, publicizing their works and things like that. So you can always make a game and put it up on Drive-Thru-RPG. The question again is you have to think about, but how am I drawing attention to it?
Right.
A Banana, did you have?
Yeah, I definitely think that you're right. Like there are pros and cons to like both publishing, well, self-publishing and sending it off to a publisher, or even like doing co-publishing. So if you're working with another publisher and you're both doing like 50% of the work, where like, you know, you're doing 50%, they're doing 50%, that's probably a little bit more even in terms of distribution, like, you know, with both resources and the work that you're putting in. But if you were doing, you know, fully self-publishing, I mean, it's a lot of work in terms of like, you know, finding a manufacturer, if you want to do like physical products, if you want to do like distribution, like, you know, if it's like a large number that you're publishing or you're selling, like if the unit number is like more than 1,000, then that's just like, okay, you should probably think about going to a distributor and like getting that ready. If it's like a digital product, it's usually a little bit easier to manage, especially if you're using Drive-Thru RPG, or if you're like, you know, going on to itch.io, you know, that kind of thing is a little easier to manage. But again, like, you know, what Keith said, there is a lot to think about in terms of like resources, both in terms of like time and money, and how are you going to, you know, get the artwork, and, you know, who's going to do the layout. So that kind of stuff, like a publisher would take care of usually, including like playtesting, development, like all this other stuff. And all you have to worry about is like the game itself. But again, like, you know, they're going to be taking up most of the percentages, right? Like you're going to be taking like a smaller percentage just because they're doing most of the work.
Right, of course.
I do think that's just such a key point. Of the thing is that today, with things like all the various forms of crowdfunding, as I said, when I made Gloom originally, there was no way I could have done it on my own. Today I could, you know, and we have our company together putting out card games. But part of the key point to that is, before you jump in on that, it is that whole, just because you can, make sure you actually want to.
Yeah.
Because it is such a big thing. If you're actually talking about a game you want to be an ongoing, in stores, all of that, that is getting into manufacturing, that is getting into distribution. And basically, I will say for myself, I love designing games. I have no interest in all of that side of things. Luckily, I found a partner who really does, and so that's great. So we work together. But I'm just saying that is the slight danger of saying, "Oh, I have this great idea for a card game. Oh, I'm gonna put it out on Kickstarter, and hey, great, you raised $90,000, but now you do have to make it." And so make sure you sort of thought of that aspect before you lock yourself in, and that it is something you're prepared to do.
Absolutely. Great advice. Great advice.
I think it's also worth keeping in mind for both games and fiction, the question of ownership is a really big one. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that if you're working for an IP, whether that's writing a Star Wars novel or writing an adventure for Dungeons and Dragons, generally you don't own that. You might not even get royalties off that, which is an important thing to consider if, you know, you create something for a big company and then they don't want to involve you anymore, or they want to use, you know, take it in a different direction. You don't necessarily have a lot of control over that. Now, there's a lot of advantages that come with that. My friend Dave Gross, who's another longtime freelancer, always says that with any IP work, the floor is higher, but the ceiling is lower, which means more people are going to see your thing. If you write a Star Wars novel, people are going to read it. But, you know, if that thing becomes a smash hit, you probably aren't going to get to cash in the same way you would if it were your own thing. So IP can be really great, but there is an advantage to owning your own stuff.
Right.
As I'm sure Veronica knows better than any of us.
Yeah. Another really important piece of insight too. IP is one of those tricky things that you have to, but you know what? Speaking of IP and anthologies, guess what you have all contributed to? So I actually
Wait,
what? Gasp. No, you each are very clearly coming from world building from various aspects, whether you're writing it into your fiction, whether you're putting it into your card games, your LARPs, or your tabletop games. World building is really, really, really important for making kind of rich places in which our imaginations can thrive, whether it's collaboratively at a table or simply, you know, hopefully sitting on the beach reading Veronica's book. So
That'd be nice.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
Read
nice?
Veronica's first book, because
Yeah.
now we need to somehow see it.
No.
So I thought we'd take a second and let each of you go around and maybe introduce your essay. You don't want to give us all the nitty gritty, but tell us a little bit about what it's about in terms of, from the aspect of world building. What does it have to do with building worlds? And Veronica, actually, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah. So my backstory behind my essay, which is about religion and world building, is that in college I was a religious studies major in addition to doing creative writing, and then I failed to take the capstone course that I needed because I was like, screw this, and so I didn't actually get the major, but most of my time was devoted to taking religious studies courses, which are a secular approach to religion. So when it comes to world building, for me it's always a question because religion does exist, but I think sometimes sci-fi fantasy authors or young adult authors sort of like shy away from exploring it just because it's a little like touchy for people, and sometimes they have their own stuff they don't want to deal with it, but my essay's intended to be a kind of argument against that, because I think you're always looking for things that do more than one job in writing, because you only have so much space, and I think that's true in RPGs as well as in books. God, that cat is so cute.
So cute, yeah. We're all like,
Sorry.
So like cute.
No, he's so cute. I'm so happy to see him, or whatever.
Yeah, you're right.
Him.
Anyway, so I'm always looking for tools that do more than one job, because there's only so much space, and you have to be kind of economical. And I find religion to be something that if you put it in your fictional world, it does a lot of work. It works, on language, on architecture, on the way that societies are organized, on who has authority in those societies, just a lot of different arenas that are kind of explored in the essay. So that was my intention, was to give a kind of toolkit for how to get a lot done in a small amount of time.
That's really important too, especially
Nice.
for, I don't know about y'all, as a GM that preps like 6 games a week, I do not have time all the time to put 4 hours into one thing. So I love the idea of getting more for less. That sounds awesome.
Budget world building.
Yeah, exactly. Budget world building.
I particularly loved the example of you have 5 jobs and room for 3 tools. I thought that was a great metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, James, you also wrote one, not really on religion, but on gods, which I think is very interesting because some people don't consider gods religion, right? If you're looking, depending on the culture you're looking at. So tell us a little bit about your essay, since it's a little adjacent.
Yeah, mine was specifically about if you're trying to construct a pantheon specifically, like whether that's Norse or Egyptian or, Forgotten Realms, Pathfinder, those kinds of things. When you have a whole bunch of gods, how do you differentiate them and how do you make them interesting and intriguing? And so a lot of the essay is based around my one main tool, which is what I call kind of the curveball, which is when you're designing a god, you sort of know what role you want the god to fill in your pantheon. But then you should always add something that seems totally orthogonal to that. So, if you've got your god of magic and secrets, then maybe you also make him the god of eggs. And then you sort of choose that randomly. And then you have to sit there and riff and figure out, okay, how do these things fit together? And then you say, okay, well, maybe, an egg's kind of a secret, right? You don't know what's inside it, right? Yeah. And so then, you sort of riff, and as you do, you can go a lot of different directions, but, maybe then your religion is all about finding the eggs of monsters. And, all of the clergy have these little magical beasts that follow them around, and they're like a preservationist society. Or maybe the egg, maybe your religion believes that all of reality is inside an egg, and they're an evil cult that's trying to crack that egg open and birth us all into the howling darkness beyond, right? And so, you come up with these by adding something that you totally wouldn't expect. It can shove you in new directions that you wouldn't have come up with if you just sat down and said, okay, what makes my god of magic different? If he were just the god of magic, you would probably never get to weird egg obsessed cult, right? And so there's a lot more about how to flesh out the details of your religion, but it's just that basic idea of smashing up unrelated things and then following, wherever the billiard balls deflect off
I love
to.
that. It's almost like the improv yes and. It's like, well, this is the hand you've been dealt. Why? How do you make that work? Yeah.
All of my
that.
world building is based on improv.
Not to put Banana on the spot, but that reminds me a lot of your essay.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, we're just
I'm
moving right
so
along.
behind. I need to actually read the book. But thank you. Yeah. So it also reminds me of like, I don't know. I was just thinking about like demonic Kinder eggs now. So thank you for that, that imagery in my mind.
Went somewhere good with the eggs.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my essay is similar in the sense that it's also talking about finding two pieces of media that you really enjoy and trying to build off of it. So the reasoning behind, why it's important is because it serves as like an inspiration point. And also, if you want to talk about the thing that you're trying to make to other people, then you can start being like, oh yeah, it's sort of like this and it's sort of like this other thing. And this is sort of like giving people like a hook into, what the thing that you're trying to make looks like. And not to sound like too cheesy, like this versus that or this meets that is usually like a very cheesy thing that people say in film and television. But I feel like there is actually like a lot of value to it because like having comparables, having like things that, people can hook onto, that gives them an idea of like what they're trying to make. And, they're more likely to be bought into like the thing that you're doing.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I can't tell you how many times I use that exact example. It's like this meets this. And there's something like so relatable about that because we know the this and we know the this, the kind of archetypal build of the style or the characters or whatever it is. So I think that's really cool.
It's cliche because it works.
Yeah, it's cliche because it works.
Exactly. It was a very sarcastic title for that essay.
Eberron definitely began. I think the sentence was the Maltese Falcon and Raiders of the Lost Ark meet Lord of the Rings. So I'm right there.
Yeah, spot on. One of my favorite RPG games, written by Free League, actually, Coriolis, is Arabian Nights in Space. Like, come on, like instantly, I know exactly what that is, what it looks like, and it works. So yeah, very cool. All right, Keith, what did you bring to this little anthology we've got?
This cat.
Yeah.
He is just. Anyhow.
What a babe! Look at that.
What? The feet are killing me.
Yeah. So what I wrote about is developing magical industries. Oh. And this is something which is obviously a basic principle of Eberron, the setting I've created, and that was based essentially off the concept of magic under the rules of Dungeons and Dragons behaves in a very scientific fashion, but in many settings it doesn't end up being harnessed in a scientific manner.
Oh.
And so Eberron sort of worked off that basic principle of if we had magic as it works in D&D in the Renaissance, what does the world look like 300 years later? And this follows on that idea, but it's not specifically saying magic as it's presented in D&D, and more just saying if you want to have a civilizations within your setting that do employ magic, have harnessed magic for sort of the advantage of civilization, what can that look like? What are the things you should bear in mind? And the sort of basic key points that are brought up is, well, where does magic come from? Is it an ambient force in the world? Is it something that's tied to the example I use is like ground up bones of dragons? Is it, for example, necromancy, where magic exists, but it has to be powered by the ghosts of the dead? And if so, how do you harvest those? So you have that question of what is the source of magic? You have the question of who can use it. So again, if anybody can use it, if it's just a skill like being a computer programmer, then that creates a more open, everybody has an opportunity. On the other hand, if it's only people from a certain family or only people from a certain whatever, then you are instantly creating a hierarchy within your world. And you have that question of, well, are the people who can use magic the sort of at the top of society, or is it the mundane majority has like enslaved the people who can do magic and force them to work in the machines of magic? So you have where does it come from, who can use it, And then you also just have things like, what are the limitations? And one of the examples that just really drives this home for me is just the concept, because even looking to Dungeons and Dragons, this is a question that you have to decide when you are sort of approaching the setting of your own, is resurrection and raising people from the dead. Is we often just sort of look at that and say, well, we just need that because we want our player characters to come back to life if they die.
Yeah.
Like, it is a practical tool that we want to have. But the big question is, if that exists in the world, stop and think how much that actually changes our experience of daily life. And then you get into the questions of who can do it, what does it take, and things like that. Of if it's money, did you have a on that one? Just to finish quickly, if it's money, then you immediately are creating a very huge class level.
Yeah.
If the rich can come back to life and the poor can't, that's a big deal. If it's a resource like diamonds, which is what it is in D&D, my immediate question is, who's got the diamonds?
Yeah, who's sitting on the diamond hoard?
That's a really interesting thing. On the other hand, you can turn that around and say, oh, it's not about money. It's about anyone can raise someone from the dead, or, any reasonable sort of force can, but you have to find someone of that person's bloodline willing to die in their place. And suddenly that is a completely different story. And so that's sort of the point to me, is especially in TTRPGs, we have these concrete rules. We have this magic raises someone from the dead, but building around that to say who can do this, how can they do this, can have enormous sort of impacts on shaping the world. And those sort of questions can be a lot more fun and interesting than sort of if we just don't really stop and think about them.
Absolutely.
If you have resurrection, you might have an egg-based cult in your world.
Right.
There you go. I'm in.
Yeah. And the question is, do you come back as an egg or a chicken?
Yeah.
Well,
There you go.
You have the whole, like I was thinking about with the eggs, is the whole like Koshi the Deathless, and the idea of people hiding their lives and things like that, is a whole egg-based preservation.
I love this
system.
egg game. Can we please develop an egg-based fantasy game that's all about an egg cult?
Yeah.
I love that so much. Okay, so it's very clear, with essays like this, I really love our Kobold guides. I call them panels in a book. They're like panels, 12 panels or 18, however many are in here, that you would get at a con in like just a few pages, which is so cool. But each of you have very specific topics you wrote on. I don't know. Did you choose those topics? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, great. Y'all get to choose the topics. Okay, great. John didn't tell me that information last week when he was here talking about that. He was just like, oh, yeah, we selected them because of these and these. But I love the idea that you chose your topic.
I was gonna write about religion, but he was like, no, it's but,
everyone wanted religion.
Everybody wanted religion. So these are topics that obviously you're either passionate about or you feel like you had a bit of insight on, maybe because it worked out well or not for you in the past. What might be another topic? Or I ask this question sometimes, what's a topic or something that you think new writers, right, novice writers or new GMs forget when they're building their worlds? The things that make cultures rich, worlds rich. What do we forget?
I mean, to me, one of the most basic things I always ask, like just most basic steps of world building, it sort of comes out to what I just said with resurrection, is, by starting and saying, how is this world different from the world we know? And then saying, and how does that change things? Like it's that thing of resurrection. We just say it's in D&D. I need it. I bring my character back to life. But then stop and think, okay, but how does that change society? What does it mean when you can bring someone back? Oh, suddenly assassination is a whole different thing. Right. How would our history be changed if we'd had this tool? And then from there, what is required? Who has it? Again, back to who's got the diamonds.
Right.
And so to me, it's that starting with that basic point of what is different, but then asking the questions that raises. How does that change the world as we know it?
Right. Nice.
I'm totally with you on all that. And in addition to the implications, I also think it's worth looking at why things are the way they are. However your society is set up right now, there were some environmental factors or social factors or whatever that pushed things to develop in the way that they did. And so keeping that idea of sort of evolution in mind, whether that's, you've got a monster with lightning tentacles, and you need to ask, well, why did they evolve lightning tentacles? That seems very specific. Or, using, going the flip direction and saying like, okay, if I know the environmental pressures in my world, what sort of cultures would arise from that? Like, I think just sort of looking backward and forward about how evolution and natural selection and things can shape the world can give you a lot of depth really quickly.
Especially if it's an old world. Everybody's like, oh, this world is, multiple thousands of years old. It's like, that's a lot of evolution. I don't ever think of it that way. I mean, now I don't know that I ever cannot think of it that way. Like, how has the world evolved?
I think another very basic question that is always important to ask is whether it's a game or a story, why can you not tell this story in our world? Because the point is, when you do build in our world, you have so much that people already do have the touchstones. They already know. So even if you're changing history, even if you're tweaking things around. And so I think it's always that question of why are you building a new world? Yeah. What is the story you want to tell that you can't tell in our world? And what does that mean? How are you reflecting that?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that I tend to go towards like building things around like our world, like not having a lot of fantasy stuff, mostly because I'm like a horror geek and I love horror. And I think like, horror is more relatable when it's, set in our world. And so like right now I'm working on a game where it's based on the reality television Below Deck, but instead of, people just like going about their day and like cleaning up the boat or the yacht or whatever, serving millionaires, they also have to like face these sea monsters. And, we're in a post-apocalyptic / climate change world. And like these sea monsters keep popping up. Like, how are things going to be managed if you have to serve like this rich clientele while also managing this boat / yacht and not getting eaten by like, I don't know, a giant squid? I think like having it in a more relatable setting is something that I think that sometimes like writers should also think about, just because like, it makes sense. If it makes sense, then just set it in our world.
Yeah.
No, please.
It's not on this topic. I'm sort of so if you have something
sidebar,
to say,
go for it.
Sidebar.
Okay. I mostly write sci-fi, not fantasy. But when I've done like a sort of more second world sci-fi fantasy, which is I made a big mistake. I always learn from like the things I don't do well. So just
I love that. Hey, you learn from your mistakes, right? Yeah.
And one thing I think happens that I see a lot, in particularly in sci-fi fantasy, but not exclusively, is like the one planet, one culture thing. Like that's not, I mean, imagine like if you just took America and made it an entire, like that doesn't make sense. America only exists because it's in a context of the rest of the world. And, no one whole planet would be just one culture, one religion, one language. Like it just doesn't, So I think one thing to consider is that in any like realm or big space that you have, there'll be a lot of diversity. And you don't have to decide all of that stuff, but I think it makes a world feel lived in when you have like, there's people who don't like each other because of history. There's like people who are essentially in conflict, people who want like different political systems. There's just like all kinds of stuff you can do. And I think it kind of goes unexplored. And maybe the reason I focused on religion in the essays, because I think this is one of the ways that it frequently is like a monolith kind of. It's like, well, we all believe in this God. Like, no, no way.
No way. Yeah, absolutely.
I think in fantasy, particularly, a place that often turns up that I think, unfortunately, more and more people are starting to recognize and go against is actually species. That it's also often that elves are like this, dwarves are like this. And, that was certainly something with Eberron we moved against and said, no, dwarves, humans, halflings, whatever, they're all just sentient beings. They're all finding their own way in the world. You should see as much diversity as, again, we see among humans, And so I agree. I think that happens because it's easy. you know, but it's not necessarily interesting. And I think it was your essay, Veronica, you know, I know someone here because I was reading the essays earlier, you know, so brought up that point of the thing with, you know, what we're all looking for is, even if we're making up worlds, you want a world that feels like it could be real. That it feels like, even if it's a different, you know, different religions than we know, different creatures than we know, that you want people to just feel like, oh, okay, this makes sense. You know, this
verisimilitude, I think, is comes up in my essay, which I'm always thinking about. Just like the appearance of reality, you know.
You know, it's very much the thing to me, just throwing in my quick 1 cent on religion, since it's, you know, one of the big topics, is always just that question of, why are people going to believe this? You know, because religion in our world is something that brings people together and creates communities. And sometimes in fantasy settings, you'll just have people worshiping the evil god, you know, the god of tyranny. And it's always like stopping and saying, okay, but why? What's in it for them? Why did they ever start doing this? And so that is the general thing, whether it's religion, whether it's why are elves good, you know, or whatever, is stop and think, sure, this has a role in your story, but why? Why is this going to feel logical to me?
You know, one quick tip for game designers who might be like, okay, so how do I not get those monocultures? I often find it really useful to sort of do a patchwork setting where I zoom in really close and do a little section at a time, right? Rather than trying to sit down and say, I will design the entire planet right now. Like, if I do that all at once, I find my ideas getting stretched too thin, and it becomes tempting to just be like, well, this entire continent is this, and this is this. Whereas if you zoom in and, you know, I'm going to detail this city today as thoroughly as I can, and then, you know, a week later, I come back and do the neighboring city, I'm going to have different ideas just because of the media I've taken in the week in between. And I find that just even spacing things out often helps create more of a sense of diversity within the world.
Well,
and patience.
To me also, especially when you're dealing with non-human cultures, you know, one of the sort of questions that comes up is what we've been talking about earlier, is how are they, what makes them different from humans, and how is that going to affect their cultures? You know, looking to Eberron again with gnomes, you know, starting from the point of saying, well, when they started as a species overall, they're weaker than humans physically, but they have a natural talent for illusion. They are sort of, because of their sense of smell and stuff, they're better with alchemy. And so to me, I was like immediately looking at this and saying, so you've got a species that is going to be looking for non-physical solutions to their problems. You know, how would they use their illusion abilities to help with this? Like, you know, these are the tools they have. What cultures will they build? Or in the case of elves, the fact that elves live so much longer than humans. But in D&D, they're not immortal. They just live a really long time. And just stopping and thinking, well, how does that affect the evolution of a civilization, the experience of death? You know, and the more you stop and sort of think, it's not just they're elves, they've got pointy ears and a +1 to dexterity, but stop and think, how are they not human? And what would be the consequences?
Your 16th birthday means a lot less as an elf than say it does as a human. Great points. I do want to tell chat, we're in our last 10 minutes. Now is a chance for those questions. While we keep chatting and talking, drop those in chat and we'll try to see if we can't get those answered for you. So you know what? We're on this religion trek up this mountain. So I'm just going to keep talking about it because you just brought up something that is actually one of the things that I think tends to get overlooked in a lot of world building, which is not just religion, but it's the celebration and death rites within religion. Which is super duper important. And sometimes I think celebrations, whether it's religiously tied or just culturally tied to like you said, that minute shrink in of these people, I think celebrations, whether it's death or life or birthdays, right, or whatever it is, are so integral to creating like rich cultures.
And I think with tabletop, and I'm sorry to be jumping in as the person who didn't write an essay on religion, because I did think that was something you both brought up of celebrations and rites. I think it's something that's often overlooked in tabletop role-playing game because we mainly focus on, well, this is just my character who can cast these spells. But part of it is that definitely things like both rituals and celebrations can be such a great setting for an adventure. You know, the feast of such and such is going on, and that, again, look at what this can do for you and for your stories beyond just, this gives me this cleric who can cast curse.
Yeah.
But religious experts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thoughts?
I mean, I think one thing that's always good to do is to read about, you know, how people on Earth do these things.
Yes.
So I love death rites, which is not a sentence I thought I would say today. But there's a great memoir out there called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. Doughty? I don't know how to say her last name. But anyway, she works for a crematorium, and she goes into like how different cultures, like how they think about, you know, preservation of the dead versus like cremation, and how they handle like grief and all that stuff. So anyway, that's just a recommendation. But I do think, like, I mean, there's so much happening here now, worldwide, and it's so interesting.
Yes.
And it always helps me with world building if I feel stuck or uninspired. Just looking at like how, you know, what do deep sea creatures look like, and how do like random cultures I don't know that much about, in a place I've never been, like how do they handle all these issues, and what do they believe about the world?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions with everything related to religion is just making sure that you're not defaulting to whatever you are used to in your own culture and your own tradition, right? Like, I feel like it's so common when somebody gets to, you know, religion, they'll be like, well, clearly the priest is Father so-and-so, and clearly the holy text is a Bible or a scroll or whatever. And I feel like people don't even take into account, like you were saying, Veronica, sort of the diversity of different traditions within the world. But then, you know, also it's fantasy, so you can go nuts. Like, I'd much rather like have, instead of your holy text being a Bible, like maybe you're an aquatic culture and the holy text is a psychic brain coral that like assumes all of the ancestral memories of everybody who's been in that city. And so when you need to have a ritual or consult the text, you dive down and commune with the coral. Like, why not? We're doing fantasy or science fiction, right? Like, if it's an alien culture, it still works.
Yeah.
I like the idea that you have the prophetic hen who lays eggs, and you have to eat the egg
to get your
the message.
Yeah. Why not?
Really working, guys.
This is a game now.
Continue with eggs all the way through.
Love it. I love it so much. There's actually there's a game I love so much. Actually, it's on the shelf right here behind me. I mentioned it last week, Overlight, which is what I think one of the most beautiful like fantasy settings for TRPG ever. But one of the cultures, though human-like, they once they reach adulthood, they live their whole life behind a mask, and their whole identity becomes how they decorate and build this mask. But when someone dies, it becomes a big deal because for the first time in their whole lifetime, their family gets to see their face again. Because the mask gets removed for this death, right? And like, what a eventful thing it is for somebody to pass into the other life and to like have the mask removed. And that one always sticks with me, as I'm like, wow, it's actually a celebration of getting to see your family again, like who they are under a mask. And it always just moves me to like my core, because I'm like, wow, that's really, really beautiful. At least for that specific culture. And so I always think about them, like, what do death rites look like? Because that is both the end and beginning for a lot of cultures. Like, it's that crossover and cycle. So very cool.
I also think something that's very interesting when you get to tabletop role-playing games that often doesn't get sort of explored is the difference between a cleric and a wizard. That in mechanically, they aren't that different. They both just cast spells. Spells work the same way. But it's that difference between sort of saying, okay, a wizard is sort of a computer programmer. They're someone who studied a system. The system has a concrete basis. They had to work really hard to master it and figure it out. The cleric literally just asks the universe to do something, and it happens.
Yes.
And I find when you look at like the red priests in Game of Thrones or things like that, you can get these depictions where you're like, wow, that person's scary and cool, that often doesn't come out in the tabletop role-playing game. And to me, it's like sort of adding that point of, no, this is someone who is in touch with a power that concretely can affect the world. Like, it could be a lot more sort of interesting than often, you know, like I said, clerics are just sort of dismissed as, well, you know, you can heal somebody.
Yeah.
We're stopping and thinking that, no, you're speaking to,
Right.
a version of reality that we don't even know. It
Right.
can be much more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, dive a little deeper as my acting teacher. Go deeper. Dive a little deeper. Ask that why question, right? Why? Love that. Well, we are wrapping up on time here, everybody. I didn't see any questions come through chat, which means clearly we answered all the questions in our egg-based religion chatter.
We aced the test.
If you want to know the answers, just scramble an egg.
That's right. Scramble an egg and eat it, and you'll get what you need from it. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me on this little excursion today. I thought we'd go around and let you tell everybody where they can find you, or like you were talking about your next work again. But everybody prepare. Very clearly, the next Midgard supplement is like the cracked egg of Midgard is coming to a Kobold Press near you. No, you can actually pick up all of these incredible bits of insight along with a bunch of other people in the Kobold Guide to World Building Volume 2. Hey, got a couple on screen. It's a nice little pocket size, which also is really nice for my to-go bag. And y'all, it is chocked full of not only this incredible bit of information, but even more essays than we could possibly cover in an hour. So let's go around and we'll go backwards this time. Again, Chaos Monster. Veronica, you are up first. Tell everybody where they can find maybe your next, where you're at and where they can find your work.
Yeah, I am mostly on Instagram at Veronica Roth. And my next work is, I have two things coming out later this year or early next year. One is a sci-fi retelling of Antigone that comes out early next year. And then in the fall, I have a dystopian mystery coming out called Poster Girl. So
nice.
That's what I've got going on.
Things on the horizon. Very nice. Thank you again for joining us. And I think it's very interesting to have somebody that, we're talking PCs and stat blocks and but to have
I'm like, wait, what's the difference between a wizard and a cleric?
I want to know more. But I have to say, as somebody that builds worlds in just a fiction realm, in novels and short stories, it's so great to have somebody come in and share insights. So thank you again. Keith, you're up next.
So I am easily found 3 different places. On Twitter, I'm HellCowKeith, all one word. In terms of Eberron content, mostly I have a website that is keith-baker.com. And as I said, I do stuff, answer questions mostly from people on my Patreon. And aside from that, my company is Together Studios, and that's spelled TWO. And that's where you can find all the other games that I'm making.
Nice. Banana.
Hey, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok at Banana Chan Games. And you can go on to my company's website, Game and a Curry, to purchase a copy of John Should Blend the Banquet Hall if you're interested. It is a game about a Chinese-American family running a restaurant in the 1920s. In the daytime, you are trying to survive and manage your restaurant and your small business. And at nighttime, John Should hopping vampires, they come out and attack everyone. And you have to try and survive. And I also have a Kickstarter out right now called Demos Academy, which is about returning back to your old creepy boarding school, which is a coloring horror tabletop role-playing game with paper dolls.
Nice. Oh, I love it so
Awesome.
much. That's very cool. Very cool. I'm trying to drop links in chat as I can, so make sure to at least click through and follow these fine folks. And last but certainly not least, James, tell us where we can find you and your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at James L. Sutter or on my website at jameslsutter.com. Next up, I've got a couple of horror short stories coming out in Nightmare and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction this summer. But then the big thing is next summer, my young adult romance, Dark Hearts, comes out, and that's queer teen contemporary romance all about falling in love with the guy who stole your shot at fame.
Ooh. I have so many feels. Right, everybody.
Jealous band romance.
You know what's coming. Go check out all of these fine writers and the works that they're doing and the many worlds that they are out there building for all of us to get a chance to play and live in. Thank you all so much. For those of you that are interested in the next bit from Kobold Press, remember we do this little chat, Kobold Chats, every week. Same Kobold time, same Kobold channel. And right now we've got a couple actual plays running on our channel, including the run of Empire of the Ghouls. Nice nice little, speaking of vampires and dark campaigns. And you can join us on Sundays in the evening for a little dark Margreave campaign called The Rotting Heart. So check out our schedule. And you know what? If you missed this chat, don't fret. We're going to have a VOD up for you. And the chat last week with a few more of the writers from this book, Kobold Press's Guide to World Building Volume 2. Man, that's a mouthful. It's already up on YouTube. So you can go get caught up and you'll be able to catch this one here as well. So you can share it with all of your friends. I like to say, if you liked it, share it with your friends. If you hate it, share it with your enemies. So get out there and share about. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we will be back next week. See you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.